Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Marquis Monday, featuring author Norm Desmarais. Norm Desmarais is a professor emeritus at Providence College and an active reenactor. He's a member of Le Régiment Bourbonnais, the 2nd Rhode Island Regiment, and the Brigade of the American Revolution. Mr. Desmarais is the author of the Guide to the American Revolutionary War series that features 6 volumes about the war on land and 7 volumes about the war at sea and overseas, as well as America's First Ally, France in the American Revolutionary War, Washington's Engineer, Louis Duportail, and the creation of an Army Corps. Finally, the road to Yorktown, the French campaigns in the American Revolution, 1780 through 1783. He's the former editor-in-chief of the Brigade Dispatch, a journal of the Brigade of the American Revolution, and author of many articles. He translated Gazette Française, the French newspaper published in Newport, Rhode Island, by the French fleet that carried the Count of Rochambeau and the 6,100 French troops to America on July 1780. It is the first known service newspaper published by an expeditionary force. He also translated General Lafayette's journal to the United States of America in 1824 and 1825, as well as the journal of a French quartermaster on the march to Yorktown, June 16 to October 6, 1781. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Norm Desmarais. Norm, welcome.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. Thank you for having me for this event. I'm very pleased. There were only three quartermasters in the French army who kept diaries. Louis Berthier was the only one whose diary has been published up to date. I had the other 2 diaries translated and published. The one that we're going to talk about tonight is The Road to Yorktown, which is the diary of Louis-François Bertrand Dupont de Beauvois, Comte de Lauberdière. He's important because he is Rochambeau's nephew and aide-de-camp. He has a point of view on the war that is very different from every other author. And I'm going to start, most authors will start, they'll talk about what is in their books. I'm going to start by talking about what's not in the book. And one of the things that's not in the book is an important map. There it is. This map is in the frontispiece of the manuscript, but it's not in the book. The importance of this map is it shows. This is the full map. The detail of the map down here shows these 2 places in green, which are the landing sites of the French army in Newport. I'm going to talk about Newport primarily because the French army under Rochambeau spent the longest time here in Newport. They spent 11 months in Newport, whereas in other places they were just passing very, very briefly, and they didn't spend very much time at all. Lauberdière's diary is the only one that talks about the French landing. All of the other diaries talk about the mechanics of the landing, saying that this regiment landed on this day, that one landed on another day, they took the artillery, and so on and so forth. But nobody ever talks about where they landed. And most people think that the French landed over here in Newport, in the harbor. That is not the case. They landed down here at what's known as Woods Castle. Woods Castle is right here, and we'll be talking about that a bit more later on. And the reason that this is important is that there were plenty of landing sites along the area, and in Berthier's map, he's got a number of those sites marked out, but Berthier was not there. He didn't arrive until October, whereas the troops landed in July. So he indicates in his diary that points that he marked as points of depart of landing were places where he expected the British to land, whereas Lepellier's diary marks only these two locations, both of which are on Mr. Wood's property. He's got a place over here and another place which is just off to the right of the map, which is not figured in here. But one of the things he says in his diary is that the troops landed 5 miles from camp. Well, the French camp is right here along the across the island, and it's exactly 5 miles from this point over to across the causeway over to the landing site to the campsite over here. So why did they march across the causeway and not land here on the beach, which is a much easier beach to land at? The reason is that this line of defense here was done by the British, and they had a fort here and a fort here, as well as all kinds of redoubts in the along the trenches. It was the French probably didn't know that the British were no longer in Newport at the time. They were coming to liberate Newport, but they were probably already at sea when they got the news or did not get the news. So if they had landed here, and if the British were occupying these two redoubts, this would have been the 18th century equivalent of a Normandy landing, because these two redoubts had cannons that were trained on the beach. So that was one reason that they did not land there. Well, Rochambeau landed on July 11th of 1780. This is 3 years after Lafayette was in America. And what's interesting is the treatment that the French had. You would expect that the America's first ally would have a brass band and lots of military welcoming them when they arrived, but that's not the case. When they arrived, there were a lot of boats that went out to meet the ships, but they all came back, and everybody locked themselves in their houses, and the French had no pilots to bring the boats in. So they weighed anchor in the morning of July 11th, and they came into Rhode Island. What I'm referring to as Rhode Island today is known as Aquidneck Island, which is the largest island of the 36 islands that make up the state, along with the mainland. So they came into the harbor into Newport Harbor. The fog was pretty heavy, and it started lifting at night around noontime. And the Chevalier de Ternay, who was the commander of the fleet, he changed his vessel. He got off the Duc de Bourgogne, which was his flagship. He went on the Amazon, which was the last ship to come into port. And they decided that the last vessel would be the only one that would go into port and land Rochambeau and company. So Rochambeau, Jacques de Biville, who was the quartermaster general of the army, both decided they were going to land, and they were the first ones to go ashore. Rochambeau's son also transferred to the Amazon, and he also went ashore with his father. He says that they arrived in the channel and they dropped anchor within cannon fire of the town, between Connecticut Island and Rhode Island. So Connecticut Island is the second largest island, and they came in between those two islands, what was called the Middle Passage, and they landed at at probably Long Wharf. But it was only Rochambeau and these few people. They went ashore on the captain's pinnace. The pinnace is the boat on the left. That's the boat on the right is a cutter, which is used for cutting boats out of a harbor when they're being attacked. But the captain's pinnace was his private boat that would bring them ashore. So Rochambeau and father and son and Mr. Beville went ashore on the pinnace and landed, but they landed over here down around Long Wharf, and the Colony House, which is the the State House at that time, is this building right over here. I'm going to be talking about Mr. Joseph Watt. He lived in this house right here, up the street, and this building right over here was the Baptist Church. We'll be talking about the Baptist Church in a few moments too. So Rochambeau lands on shore, and this is an overlay map of a modern map with an 18th century map. So here you see a lot of landfill that's been filled in, and like roads here that used to be water. So he lands and he's wandering around in this area, and he finds nobody is around. Everybody locked their doors. They're all in their houses, and they're sort of afraid of who the French are. I'm not getting into that topic because I have a whole other talk that is a two-part talk, each one of them close to an hour, talking about why that happened and what Rochambeau did about it. But anyway, nobody's there to greet him, and the Comte de Viomenil is afraid that Rochambeau is on land. He's unaccompanied, so he decides that he's going to send the Grenadier Company of the Bourbonnais Regiment to serve as his bodyguard. So as Rochambeau is wandering around, he runs into a Mr. Wanton, probably Joseph Wanton, who had been former governor of the state. And he was deposed in 1780, and he was replaced by Nicholas Green, who was Nathaniel Green's cousin and also Christopher Green's cousin. Christopher Green was colonel of the Rhode Island Regiment at that time. He had been the colonel of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, which is known as the Black Regiment, but the 1st and 2nd Rhode Island regiments were combined into one in 1779, and he was appointed commander of that regiment. He was in Newport, but with about a dozen men, but he wasn't around where Rochambeau landed. So Mr. Wanton invited Rochambeau to his house. They had tea, and they were discussing. And Rochambeau asked if there was any militia around or any military officers, and he asked that Mr. Christopher Green be brought to him, which he did. Christopher Green arrived the next day. Now, if you read General Heath's diary, General Heath will tell you that Rochambeau got a very warm welcome and a suitable welcome. Heath was nowhere near Newport at the time. He was in Providence, which is 45 miles away. He was making himself look good by saying that the French got a decent reception. Count Louis-François Louis de Clermont-Crèvecoeur wrote in his diary that the French were astonished to find hardly a soul. The shops were closed and the local people little disposed in our favor. The people would have preferred at that moment, I think, to see their enemies arrive rather than their allies. We inspired the greatest terror in them. The general had all the difficulty in the world finding lodgings. He had to stay at a public house that night, and the rest of the troops stayed on board the ship. They only got off the ship the next day. I mentioned the Bourbonnais, the Grenadiers of the Bourbonnais Company, serving as the bodyguard. This is the company of Bourbonnais, the Bourbonnais Regiment, the Bourbonnais Company of the Saintonge Regiment. The orange lapels and cuffs on these coats indicate the Soissonnais Regiment. The Bourbonnais regiments would have black with, you see, the orange. The The bearskin caps added another 12 inches to the height of the soldiers. The soldiers, to be a grenadier, you had to be a minimum of 5 feet 8 inches tall, and the 12-inch grenadier caps added another 12 inches to the height. So these guys looked like monsters. One of the things that the local inhabitants were afraid of was that the British had told them that all the French were monsters, and they ate frogs and snails and salads, and they even ate babies. So they were very much afraid of the soldiers coming ashore, but they were very surprised to find very young, handsome men coming, and some portly officers landing also. This illustration shows a number of soldiers. The guys in the green here, the green cuffs and lapels, are from the Saint-Onge Regiment. And you can tell what units the soldiers are from or what their function is by the turncoats on the designs on the turncoat. If you look where my mouse is turning here, you see that there's a fleur-de-lis on the coat. That indicates that this man is an infantryman. This guy is a grenadier. He's got a bomb on or a grenade on his coat. Notice that in the back, in the back, you've got this grenadier of the Soissonnais Regiment is wearing his bearskin cap, as in the previous slide, but this grenadier is wearing a cap or a hat like the infantry soldiers. The reason for that is the warrant of 1779 ordered the grenadiers wear hats instead of the bearskin caps. Not all the soldiers were outfitted with the proper equipment at the time, so you have some soldiers who have both of those outfits. So the artillery was unloaded from the ships on July 13th through the 16th, and the troops were unloaded at the same time. By the 16th, all of the troops were in camp. The tents were all set up, and there were hospitals designated. There were more than 800 sick, which it's not surprising after a long voyage that they did. They were at sea for the crossing took 71 days, and the troops were on board the ship for like 3 months. The reason for the 3 months was that they hit bad weather, they had accidents, they had to go back to port, and the troops were never landed from the ships. They stayed on board the ships while the repairs were done or through the storms. So when they arrived in Newport, Rochambeau writes to the Prince de Montbarry, who was the French Minister of War, on July 25th, 1780, and says that he had 1,500 sailors ill and 800 soldiers. That's about 10% of the army. So he did not. They were not in a good situation at this time. While the troops were in Newport, there were 153 deaths in the 11 months that they were in Newport. 35% of those were in August and September of 1780, as opposed to 27 deaths of those soldiers who were in Providence. 44% of those died in August and September. The reasons that they died were probably scurvy, ague, which is the 18th century term for malaria, dysentery, cholera, or possibly smallpox, but most likely not smallpox because all the troops were inoculated for smallpox before when they enlisted in the army. The Comte de Menonville's diary says that scurvy and dysentery were the main causes of illness and death. Going back to Lobedier's diary, he has a passage where he says that one has to experience seasickness, the apathy and the depression which we are in order, the depression where we are in order to define it and to have passed 3.5 months on the water to understand the pleasure we have to recover, so to speak, the use of our legs. the ability to drink fresh water and to breathe fresh, pure air on arriving on land. Our long passage was one of the more pleasant ones. It is impossible to conduct a more urgent convoy than the one done by the Chevalier de Ternay, but he missed two good occasions for his own glory. His entire fleet had an opinion and would never forgive him. I'll come back to that if we have time toward the end of the talk. This is the from the order book of the Count de Rochambeau. It's dated July 20th, 1780, and he says in the last two lines here that are on the screen that he's appointing a guard to go to the hospital, the Baptist hospital. The Baptist hospital was newly appointed as a hospital. Some of the soldiers had gone to Providence for the hospital. That's why there were soldiers who died there. There were also some who went to Papasquash Point in Bristol, Rhode Island, which is on the mainland. That was a temporary hospital, and but the main hospital was at the Baptist church. Now, the importance of the Baptist church, well, he's posting a guard. He says the guard is a sergeant, a corporal, and 12 men. A little bit later, he's going to post he posts guards at that hospital throughout the entire camp, throughout the entire time that they were camped in Newport. One of the interesting things, that note was written on the July 20th. 3 days later, on July 23rd, Claude Blanchard, who's the commissary of war, indicates in his diary that Rochambeau went to the hospital to hear mass and to visit the sick. Well, given the fact that the hospital is in the Baptist church, that mass had to be said in the Baptist church, which is a very astounding thing to have a Catholic mass in a Baptist church. That would be unheard of today. On September 23rd, 1780, he indicates down here that they're changing the guards. Every other day they're changing the guards, and he's appointing a lieutenant and 3 squads to Woods Castle. And he's saying that from then on, throughout the encampment, they're posting this guard at Woods Castle, which is the landing site, and that's where they expected the British to attack or to land if they were to attack. He indicates Lobedier indicates in his diary around this time, actually at the beginning of October, Rochambeau is exercising the troops, and he's planning to have some war games. They have four war games, all held at Woods Castle, and he's indicating that in his diary. When they landed, the Vicomte de Noailles, is Lafayette's brother-in-law, and he was appointed to go to Connecticut Island, which is now Jamestown Island, and he brought a squadron of troops. They say they were within quarter cannon range from Connecticut Island. So he brings the 2nd Battalion of the Soissonnais Regiment. They take possession of the dominant hill on the island. Now, the highest point in Rhode Island is about 800 feet, a little bit over 800 feet. So this hill is not very high. It could be maybe 10 feet high. So that's the hill that they occupied, and they guarded that. And they note in all the diarists note that during this period, the troops could always see the British Navy off in the distance, and this was the only time between July 20th to the 23rd. Had the enemy wanted to attack, that would be the only opportunity they had to attack, because after that, Rochambeau had all of the defenses set up so that it would be sort of fruitless to attack the island. The British have a council of war on board the London, and General Arbuthnot and General Clinton disagree. So they decide that because they disagree, they don't land any troops or they don't make any attack, and they've lost their opportunity to attack the French. Um, Meanwhile, there was one of the transport ships that was coming got lost in the fog, and the agreement was that if any ship got lost from the fleet or separated from the fleet, they would go to Boston, and Boston would be the rendezvous place. Well, the Ile-de-France, which is the ship that was carrying the half of the Bourbonnais regiment, ends up landing in Boston around July 24th, and they march. They find out that the the army is down in Newport, so they march from Boston to Newport. They arrive in Newport on July 28th. So they had a few sick men that they left behind in Boston. Now, on August 25th, August 25th was St. Louis Day, which is the King's name day. The King's name day is more important than his actual birthday. So on St. Louis Day, they had what's called a feu de joie. Rochambeau reviews the troops, which means that they had a parade and he had an inspection. And after the inspection, they're all lined up in formation, and the feu de joie consists of firing weapons from the left side of the army all the way down to the right side of the army. If you've got a small group of people, like just a couple of companies, you would fire one man at a time. If you've got a whole army, you would fire by company or by regiment. So in this case, we've got 5,000 soldiers, plus officers and so on. So you've got 5,000 men at arms, and you've got a number of forts around the island. You've got the forts are equipped with these various caliber cannons that I indicate here. So we have a total of 61 guns and 17 mortars, plus the 5,000 muskets that the soldiers are firing. And the fleet has 21, the fleet is going to fire 21 shots per vessel. We've got 48 vessels. So we've got 699 guns firing the salute. So what they do is they fire down from left to right, then right to left, and then the whole army and the whole navy fire at the same time. This would be 183 artillery shots, 1,008 shots from the vessels. This would have consumed between 2,800 to 3,500 pounds of gunpowder. That is one hell of a fireworks display. This is an example of a very small feu de joie, where you've got just a couple of companies firing, and you see all the smoke that's in the air. This was held at a reenactment at Fort Adams in Newport. On August 29th to September 2nd of 1780, the delegation of natives comes from upstate New York, consisting of 22 Iroquois, Illinois, and Four Nations Indians. They come to Newport to praise Rochambeau, to proclaim allegiance to the king. The reason for that is that the French and the Indians were always allied with each other, and they were the enemies in all of the colonial wars. So now they're coming to request. They're coming to greet Rochambeau, but they're also coming to request gifts from the king. So Rochambeau, they request a priest. Rochambeau gives them one of the priests, the Capuchin. He gives him 2 weeks leave to go to the Indians, but the priest never came back. So it appears that he was so well received by the Indians that he stayed among the tribes. Rochambeau gives the Indians some gifts of necklaces, beads, and various types of trinkets. And there's an empty house in Newport which they use to house these visitors. And given the fact that the Indians are noted for getting drunk and having wild parties when they were drunk, he posted 2 grenadiers at the doors to make sure they didn't go out or in uh, without any accompaniment. The following day, the guests are invited to dine with Rochambeau, and he has a review of the army under arms. Uh, the Indians were particularly impressed by the hussars, who are the dragoons on horseback, who were running at full gallop. One of the things that astounded the Indians was that Rochambeau had very strict discipline. The men were not to eat unless they were authorized by the officers. The camp was in an apple orchard, and this is the time of year when the apples are ripe, and the trees were probably full of ripe apples. And the Indians were astounded that none of the apples had been eaten. Any other army would have devoured all of those apples. The rest of the diary at this point describes the customs and practices of the Native Americans, and Le Bélier goes on to describe the war games that were held in early October. One of the instances in that war game is that in the firing of the cannons, you had to ram the gunpowder down the barrel, and somebody had forgotten to remove the ramrod. So when the gun fired, this ramrod is fired down the field and is tumbling head over heels, and it ended up hitting a woman who was a spectator. She was off to the side of the field. She got hit in the leg by the ramrod. Well, Rochambeau assigns his personal physician to treat her until her leg healed. On October 20th of 1780, another delegation of Indians comes down to meet Rochambeau and to request charity. This group is Abenaki and Micmac Indians. By this time, the Rochambeau and the French troops had made an impression on the locals. So they were now much more. Well, first, one thing that impressed them was the fact that the army brought cash. Cash was in very hard supply, and everything that the French army purchased, they paid for in cash. Now, their cash was silver and gold. They the shipment that they brought was equivalent to, it was a 1.5 million livres, and there was an instance where they had a similar shipment where they needed to transport that money. It took 14 wagons pulled by 48 horses or oxen to transport that money. So this is what the amount of money that they brought to Newport, and this is what they were paying. They were paying for all of the stuff that they acquired. When they first arrived, the merchants didn't want to sell them anything. They didn't want to provide services or anything. But when they saw that they had hard cash with them, then they went bent over backwards. But they raised the prices tremendously. All of the diarists talk about how the prices were so astronomically high, but the French paid for it anyway. In November, they go into winter quarters, which meant that all the officers were quartered with families in the city. And during the winter, the residents learned French from the Frenchmen, and the French learned English. So they learned each other's languages. So by the time the French army left Newport the following June, most of them spoke pretty good English. So the time in winter quarters was quite well spent, and made good relationships, to the point that by the time the French army left Newport, all the residents were in tears when they left. The news of what happened in Newport preceded them as they marched along the way. When they got to Philadelphia, they had a grand reception by Congress. and the news of the French army had made its way, and by after the surrender at Yorktown, the army is coming back north. By this time, the population had been so enamored with the French that all of the women had to have French coiffeurs. They had to have the latest French fabric, the French styles. They had to have French tailors and so on. So the French style was very much in vogue at that time. Um, I'm pretty much over my time, a little bit over my time. So I'll just mention that one of the things that people think about, there were three meetings between Rochambeau and General Washington. One was in September 20 to 22 in 1780. That was held in Hartford, Connecticut. In March, Washington comes to Newport and spends a week in Newport with Rochambeau. And on May 20th, 1781, which is just before the attack, the siege of Yorktown, they have a conference in Wethersfield, Connecticut. People think that any one of these three, or maybe all three of these conferences, were to prepare the plans for the Yorktown campaign. But that is impossible because Cornwallis was nowhere near Yorktown at that time. But in May of 1780, he was in Petersburg, Virginia. He didn't arrive at Yorktown until August 1st. By August 15th, they get Rochambeau gets a letter from Admiral de Grasse indicating that he's coming up to the Chesapeake, and he was only going to go as far as the Chesapeake because he didn't want to get caught in a hurricane in the Northeast. So he was only going that far, and after the hurricane, once hurricane season began, he would then move south and go back to the West Indies. So that was the clincher that determined that the army was going to move from New York and march south, and that's when they were heading to Yorktown at that point. So since I'm already over my time, I'll stop there and open it up for questions if anybody wants to ask questions.
Thanks so much, Norm. DAR Regent Debbie Thompson will now present questions to you. Debbie, welcome.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. So far, I don't have anything from the listeners tonight. So, what makes the Commande de Liberté's diary so special? Is there a special viewpoint from it?
It's because he's Rochambeau's nephew and aide de camp, and he's got a particular viewpoint. He's also one of the six quartermasters. He's one of the six quartermasters who came with the army. So when they marched to Yorktown, every regiment marched. They marched in order of in the order of their landing. So the Bourbonnais regiment marched out first. The Royal Depot marched out second, and so on. Each one of these regiments had a quartermaster with them, and General Dumas. Well, he wasn't general at the time. He became general later. He's the officer. I translated his diary also, and I believe that he is the one who plotted the route to Yorktown. The route soldiers marched two different routes. There was like a northern and a southern route, so to speak, and they marched two different routes. And I believe he's the one who mapped out the route. But the quartermasters would lay out the camps and everything. So Louverture had a very unique perspective, and he's got a lot of stuff in his diary that you don't find anywhere else in any other diary. The head ranger at Stony Point Battlefield National Park contacted me after reading my translation, and he said he'd been researching a question for 20 years and found the answer in this diary. This diary gave me 5 published articles prior to my translating of it. So it's given me, a number of talks such as this one, but I've also had 5 published articles from the diary that I did before I actually got to translate the book.
Okay. Now, you had mentioned that, let me see what it's, let's see. We do have a question from Joan. The FET used in substantial amount of ammunition. Weren't they concerned that they might need it later?
They brought plenty of ammunition, and then they had other ships that were coming. Well, one of the things was that before they left France, they were supposed to send twice as many men that they actually had, so they could only gather enough ships to bring half the army. By the time the ships went back to France, the other half of the army had been reassigned, and so they never did come. But Rochambeau was waiting for this army for months after the fact, after their arrival. He's still waiting for the arrival of the second half of the army. It's only when uh, Lafayette returned to France on his second return, he learned that the army would not be sending the rest of the king wasn't going to be sending the rest of the army. So he brought the news to Rochambeau that they weren't coming. So he's living in expectation that the army is coming with more muskets, more ammunition, and so on. So uh, I think they were also getting ammunition from the West Indies also.
Okay. All right. Do we know whether Rochambeau and Washington ever did get together to plan the Yorktown campaign?
They did, but they were when they left Newport, when they left Rhode Island, and they went to besiege Yorktown. They spent a month in the area of Peekskill, New York, um, and the area is called Continental Village. And the American army and the French armies were separated by 2 miles, and so they camped there. They had a number of skirmishes around New York, and the plan was to attack New York and capture New York. And it's only when on August 15th, when they get the letter from de Grasse, that they realize that uh, it's not going to be New York, that they're heading south to Yorktown. And so they marched out at that time. That's when they decided. It was in August, and Rochambeau is meeting with Washington after he received a letter from de Grasse, and they decide. He influences Washington, so we've got to go. We've got to march south and head to. Maybe they didn't know they were going to Yorktown at that moment, but they were going south, and it ended up at Yorktown.
Okay.
Lafayette is already at Yorktown at this time because there were he went down there to counter Benedict Arnold's raids along the rivers there. He was raiding Roanoke and that whole area. So they were going down there to counter his attacks. Lafayette's already there, so they join up with Lafayette when they arrive there. They all go to Williamsburg and then over to Yorktown.
Okay. How can people purchase your books?
You can get it on Amazon. You can order it through me at um, revolutionaryimprints.net is my website, and these are other places you can order it from. Fort Plain Museum in Fort Plain, New York, is probably the best museum that has. They have the best Revolutionary War bookstore that I know of. Fort Ticonderoga used to have the best bookstore, but now I think it's Fort Plain Museum that has it. So
Okay.
I'd suggest getting it there. The publisher is Savas Beatty, and you can get it from their website. Um, but Savas Beatty liquidated a good part of their stock about a year or two ago, and I have over 100 copies here at home.
Okay. All right. What closing message do you have for our listeners regarding the French campaigns in the Revolutionary War?
What was the beginning of the question?
What closing message do you have for our listeners regarding the French campaigns in the Revolutionary War?
The French, well, we We suspect that Washington won the battle at the siege at Yorktown. It's actually the French. Without the French help, two-thirds of the Allied troops at Yorktown were French. The Rochambeau's army was about the same size as Washington's army. The big clincher was the armies that came up from the West Indies with the French fleets. De Grasse came up, and Saint-Simon brought the Marquis de Saint-Simon brought a whole bunch of French troops, and there were a couple of other generals who brought up regiments. So the size of the French army was overwhelming to the British. Plus what they not only what they provided, but they had they provided us with lots of materiel. There's some 5,000 soldiers who died of the 44,000 some odd soldiers that came up here. They died for American freedom. They spent an enormous amount of money. Not only the French government, but various individuals like the Comte Lafayette spent a lot of money from his own personal fortune. So there was the French suppliers they provided, because the French were in the process of re-outfitting their army. They had a lot of army surplus, which became a lot of the material that we had in our army. Beaumarchais sent 12 cargo ships of supplies to America before 1770. Well, by 1777. So one of those ships had a lot of artillery from the French. That artillery was used to win the battle at Saratoga. Had we not won the Battle of Saratoga, France would not have decided to join the American cause, and that was a turning point to get the French to join the war, and they became our biggest ally during the war. And it was thanks to the French cannon and French help that occurred.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your talk this evening. It was very informative and very enjoyable.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Norm, we're so honored to have hosted you tonight for our Marquis Monday. Your program has been recorded and will be made available for later viewing on our YouTube channel, which is Lafayette 200 Marquis Mondays. We do hope everyone enjoyed tonight's program, and we invite you to attend our next presentation, which will take place on Monday, June 2nd, with Anne Supsick, author of the bookmark. Until then, bonsoir. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.